welcome to part 2 of the Intersections podcast interviewing Brian and Mark. We've got Kuan Collins ready to go here, so why don't you take it away, Kuan, and ask him some more questions.
So I am so fascinated with the Eastern philosophy side of this, because what he has come up with now in his research is this idea that in order for us to be mindful, because we can, if we agree that mindfulness is the answer to doing the things that you guys are describing with OODA and being open to new inputs and integrating that into your decision making, that part of your brain needs to be worked and it needs to be renewed. And that requires us to become much more Eastern in our way of thinking. We need to be yogis, we need to meditate, we need to do the things that open up that part of our brain. So yeah, I think Chet and I have bonded over that over on LinkedIn, and I want to write a book on this for sure. It's a lot of the research that I'm doing now on how do we help organizations to not sort of, I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion around mindfulness, but I think Ponch, you brought this up, right? So we talk about all these things in disjointed ways, and we're not really bringing it all together and saying how this can impact how we are functioning as organizations.
Yeah, so I think we could bring folks together on this, because if you put the OODA Loop at the center of how we be, or how we are or being, we can talk about ego dissolution with the use of different modalities, including mindfulness, yoga, meditation, prayer, psychedelic assisted therapy, and explain how that works with the OODA Loop. And then we can turn around and talk to another group about using the same thing to talk about artificial intelligence, turn over here and talk about teamwork, and then turn over here and talk about organizational design and safety and agility, right? And then flow. The whole concept of flow, we can talk about using the OODA Loop as well. In fact, there's a way we draw the OODA Loop with a boundary or a Markov blanket that is a illustration of a flow system. So there's so many capabilities in what we can do with this right now. And Mark and I are just getting started. And same with AGLX. We're just bringing everybody together and go, hey, look at what we can do. Look at the gift John Boyd gave.
I want to help you guys.
Yeah.
We
want help. Yeah, we want help.
This is very
done alone.
cool.
But that's the thing is, think about this. John Boyd did this pretty much. Well, he had a small network working with him on this, right? But he really did this alone, in my view. We're not doing that, and the reason we're not doing that is because maybe back in the '80s, John Boyd was looked at as a little out there.
Oh, he was all the way out there for that time. Yeah.
And now it's kind of normal to have these different creative thinkers out there and things like that. So let's bring them together.
I think it would be normal to have the creative thinkers, but we're still also on the periphery. You know what I mean? Right. We're still also considered not normal.
Right. So the podcast and what we're doing with AGLX is we want to become an attractor. So that, Mark can talk more about the guerrilla warfare aspect of what we're trying to do. And that's exactly what I think John Boyd was trying to do in the 80s, was to become an attractor, but just didn't have the legs back then. Yeah. People didn't have the knowledge of it. Now we have it. The timing was
wrong.
Yeah, the timing's right. We're going to go through this economic crisis. We're going to see some pretty bad things. We're going to go through a cycle of destruction right now. And then on the back end, it's going to be this amazing creation, which is going to call for something like what we have, and what you're doing to really create an amazing future, right? And that's kind of where we are right now.
Very exciting. So I love, what you're describing, Ponch, and how you guys are bringing the community together of like-minded individuals, of the coalition of the willing, as I like to call it. What is the trend? Where is this taking off the most, I guess, in this intersection of OODA and other domains, other than where it sort of was born? I guess what's most exciting to you guys personally about where this is really catching fire and catching a gear?
I'll let Mark go first, because I think he has a hot answer. Mark?
Yeah, the applicability that I found is asset management, trading, investing, because the environment of markets, of any type of market that's investable, in my assessment, whether it's stocks, bonds, domestic, international, doesn't matter. The way of thinking that Boyd teaches is absolutely applicable there, to the point where I was never in direct combat, but I described going through the great financial crisis to a friend of mine who's a Navy SEAL. And I said, I've never seen myself city blocks of businesses and things like that leveled to the ground, and people displaced and losing everything, and that kind of violence and danger. I've seen the same exact thing in markets going through 07, 08, 09, and it was totally bloodless. It still had a very deep, profound psychological effect, such that people were still committing suicide. People had lost everything on bad decisions. People had, not made I don't know, some people, I guess, see that correlation, others don't. But, instead of bullets flying, there's uncertain markets that are constantly moving. And if you're not oriented to those effectively, you're not going to be able to act quick enough to make the right decisions to survive, let alone thrive. So I've seen a lot of applicability there. And I was in asset management for almost 20 years. And that was sort of my value prop to people. Like, I can show you how to do this. Your tax dollars actually paid for me to learn this stuff. And then in my own time, I stepped out and have dug on this further. But the applicability is universal. So really, our model client is, do you have humans that make decisions and act? If the answer is yes, then we can teach them. And that's really, I think, the most effective way is to show them how all this works, because we're not a recipe shop. We're not a formula shop. We're not going to give you a card that you're going to use in every situation. You can't do that, because every situation is going to be unique, dynamic. People are complex, and the environments that they're in are also complex. So applicability range is a great one too. And I'm biased because I'm married to one. Nursing. I remember, I've been married to my wife 22 years. We first met, I was a first lieutenant, and I remember handing her the OODA Loop, and she looking at it at some point and totally got it. She can explain it without even me saying a word. I've handed it to countless nurses, and it's
how they operate.
It's how they operate. And I guess, and I could take it with, I've talked with sports teams, law firms. I love to always tell people, they say, this doesn't apply here. I don't need to do this. I say, if you'd like, I'll bring in my 14-year-old daughter, my youngest of 4, and she'd be happy to show you how this applies to her lacrosse team, her field hockey team. So. I
love the sports discussions. Like, I think that's how I first reacted to something. It was on the Super Bowl. It was Super Bowl Sunday, and you guys talked about
it was fast transients.
Yes. That made me so happy. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah, we had our friend Major General Brooke, call sign Tank Leonard, come on and talk about a range of things, certainly Boyd and energy maneuverability theory. But we did a 40 seconds of Boyd. Boyd's nickname was 40-second Boyd. So at No Way Out podcast, we have these little video clips, 40 seconds of Boyd. And General Leonard gave it about as good a description of fast transients, such that if you saw the other day, I reposted it to make it applicable for the basketball game the other night. I think, Ponch, you had a good conversation about, I forget what game it was that you had seen, where the other team, I forget what the teams were, but the fast transient process.
Kansas State, the
Kansas State game. The other team just stands there and they don't know what's going on.
They can't even comprehend.
Yep.
Which is awesome. Oh man. All right.
There's another aspect I want to touch on here, and that is large organization. So we do have large clients that listen to the podcast. So let me just kind of paint a picture. In an organization that is using human and organizational performance, they're using scaled agile framework, they're using Kanban, they're using Scrum. They have agile coaches from all the big firms. They have many consultants in there that are teaching them strategy. They are listening to the podcast, and they're starting to see that instead of looking at these as disparate approaches to safety, agility, innovation, human HR, safety, and all that, they're starting to see the bigger picture and say, hey, this is just one holistic organization. Everything's interconnected. And that's what the podcast and what we're doing with AGLX is trying to do, is let them see that. And going back to Mark's point, there's no single approach or formula. It's a way of understanding your organization and coming up with, I think it's called emulation, not imitation. You want to emulate what others are doing. You don't want to imitate them. You want to make it your own and create the agility that you really want, right? And that's why when we had Alistair Coburn on here, one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto, the person that actually organized the Agile Manifesto, pointed out the direction that Agile went on in 2003 is wrong, right? It should be looking more like what we're talking about with the flow system,
Yep.
team science, distributed leadership, understanding complexity
So
theory.
yeah, I'm an instructor for DevOps and Scaled Agile, and I teach all of these things. And that is my biggest frustration, is
Yeah.
that everybody thinks that they have to pick one methodology, right? And this is
Yeah.
we're only a safe shop, or we're only a DevOps shop. And it could not be further from how these are supposed to operate. And as we think about the government, so I do a lot of work with that's all I do is national security related work. And we're working on digital transformation, right? That's the
God
big
bless you for
buzzword.
doing that. I can't do that. I can't work with the government. I just can't do it. I was a government employee. I just, I still work with Defense Innovation Unit as reservist. It is a pile of coat hangers that is turned into a safe shop. And what's interesting about working with the government is you have to work with government employees and government and former military members who talk about OODA Loop but don't understand it, right? So,
But we have to help them, right? If we are going
yeah.
to war with Russia or China anytime soon, and this is not even classified information,
right,
right? That we need to fix this. This is the one thing that you guys are working on is what we need to fix. And
this is the answer. We learned this from the military. We learned this
is
from
the
GPE,
answer.
right?
And everybody has the fundamentals to get
Yeah.
there. They just need to elevate the thinking. I think
So
is the way Mark
I think you and I are
talked about.
passionate about this. This is about survival of our country, right?
It
Survival of
is.
our nation. Right. And what we're doing is we're using pseudoscience to win a war against people that understand Eastern philosophy.
Exactly.
They understand the things that we have in our hands better than we do. And yet we can't do anything because our leaders will not listen to a Mark McGrath, a Brian Rivera, a Chris Alexander,
A
Nigel
John
Thorne,
Boyd, a
a
Sun
John
Tzu,
Boyd, right?
A Kuan
Yeah,
Collins.
a Quan
Yeah,
Collins.
exactly. So this is absolutely frustrating to me. Is this is about survival of a nation, and we're getting our asses kicked because
handed to us.
Yes, right.
And yeah, my nickname at work is Hurricane Kuan.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
they think I'm crazy. And I'm like, okay. It is
Love
what
that
it is.
nickname. That's great.
But,
Great.
We need a
You know,
hurricane. I want to see that on the National Weather Service. Get that in the alphabet there.
So it's funny. When it first got told to me, I'm like, oh, that's a compliment. And they're like, no, that's not a compliment. I'm like, why not? Because after a hurricane, you have growth, you have rainbows, everybody's good. We're clean. It's like cleared the thing. And if you weren't hurricane proof, then maybe also you needed to go away. It's okay.
One thing that Ponch and I say a lot in our interactions with people, but also too, we allude to it often on the podcast. All of this stuff that we're talking about and we're learning about it's universal, and anybody can understand this, and anybody can use this to their advantage. In many respects, not to get into I don't want to go in the theological direction, but we've all been given this tool and this resource to do exactly this, to improve our capacity for free and independent action. So the only real excuse is just people just not wanting to.
So it's a desire. One thing, as I work in innovation, right? Because everything that I do is disruptive and is change and requires this ability to think differently. And so I'm constantly up against what my executive coach will call obstructionists, right? Because there's everybody that wants to stop the new thinking. There's the skeptic who's like, I don't believe it. I don't believe this OODA thing, right? That you're saying is so applicable to all these other things. And they need outcomes. Like, what's the outcome? We need to drive the outcome, not the thinking so much with those obstructionists. Then there's the cops, right? Because I deal with like security people all the time. You can't do this because you're going to break the law. You're going to release classified information, all those things. And those guys, we need to bring on the team. We need to say, hey, come with me. I agree with you. You have the right intention with wanting to protect our data, but let's integrate what you are saying into what I'm trying to do and then build it together. Then we have the traditionalists, right, that are like, we will never do it this way. We've always done it this other way. We're never going to change, right? And they need friends. They need to see that, for example, Defense Innovation Unit, we have people that have been trained just like you, same culture, same everything, right? And they are thinking differently. right? We need to show, because there are pockets in the government where they are functioning this way and they are making it happen. They're flowing, they're doing all the right things, but we need that to happen across the enterprise, because this doesn't matter if we just have software factories doing it, because guess what? There's the valley of death and it just kind of goes nowhere after that. Or we have DIU that's doing God's work. And then after that, what did we do? Nothing out of DIU has made it into a program of record. That is tragic for this country. And then after the traditionalists, we have the territorialist. And these people are narcissistic, not nice people, because they're just like, oh, this is mine. This is mine. You can't be here and go away. You know, this is my sandbox. And so those guys, we can't do anything about. We need to ignore them and just go do the thing anyways. And then we'll invite them to the party once we beat our adversaries. And then the capitalists, all they want is to make the money. So I think they are our best friend because they know, right? They are the ones that are saying we need to go faster. And I think we can demonstrate that with this new way of thinking, with this new mindset, that's how we go faster and stop like creating these like more silos. We don't need more silos. We don't need more, disparate, disjointed discussion about this. We need one discussion.
And what we say, so that's right on. And what we say to that is, you might be all set, or you might not listen in. Your competitors might be. Or I could be talking to your competitors, and if I'm talking about your competitors about this, and they get it, you're gonna be in a tight spot. And then the second thing that we say, hey, great, we can come in and speak, and Ponch has co-authored a phenomenal book, but after the keynote's over, after the conference is over, what happens next?
Yep.
Okay. What are you going to do now?
Yep.
That's what we at AGLX, that's really our, it's about teaching people things so effectively that they can integrate it into what they're doing. And then I think Kuan, you and I talked about before, it just becomes part of everyday life, because everywhere you are, you're observing, orienting, deciding, and acting. You're making decisions, you're taking actions, you're learning, you're trying to adapt and improve your circumstances.
So that's the perfect segue to my next question, Mark. So what is next for you two and No Way Out, and this mission and movement that you guys are starting?
Well, we just started with the probe first. So, we're 3 months into this, wanted to test the waters, kind of like you're doing. Feedback's been phenomenal. We have some growth things we need to do. And, talking the admin side of things of a podcast, we didn't know exactly what the environment would feed back to us, but we're getting that now, and it's really changing the way we're thinking about how we organize AGLX. But for me, what comes next with the content on No Way Out, more on the AI side of the house, the Eastern philosophy. There's nothing new under the sun. I think you know that, right? So what we can learn from 2,000 years ago, maybe 100,000 years ago, because there's some strange science coming out says that there's other things that happen on this planet and in the universe that we may be able to pull from. I think one of the things that we need to get better at, and we haven't done this yet, and that's kind of synthesizing what people are hearing. What is a Markov blanket? How does that relate to active inference and AI? How does that relate to my organization? I've heard these things from this person. We got some folks coming on and talking about lean and the origins of lean through Charlie Protzman and his grandfather. How does that connect back to the Toyota production system and even to our national security? So those are things that we need to improve on going forward. And Mark and I are still trying to figure out, do we bring guests on to have that conversation? Is that something he and I do? So there's still a lot of unknowns out there for the podcast, but there's so many possibilities that we didn't know 3 months ago. Mark, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, if you go back, we've had now 16 episodes out, 15 with guests. And if you go to any one of those, we're having a conversation and we're all learning, in some cases, one person might be teaching us something, and three are learning, because they're learning as much from us as we are from them in a lot of respects. And that was kind of one of our intents, is that, if you saw, you kind of described it earlier, Kuan, if we were sitting around having coffee, or we're sitting around in a bar or whatever, and the world can listen in to what we're talking about. And one of our intents is to show people that this stuff is actually able to be integrated into your day-to-day life, certainly your business. And that's why we exist. And that's why that's where we can really help people out. To Ponch's point, the engagement that we've got on it so far, it's a good surprise. We got a lot of great feedback and a lot of people that we've now we could call acquaintances and friends and people that we're looking to continue to direct action with, which is great. But the mission never ends of being a place where we can, with others, develop and advance the ideas of John Boyd, because he's not here anymore.
Yep.
Dave Snowden said it perfectly on our first podcast with a guest, which was episode number 2. Dave Snowden of the Kinevin framework, who's an advisor to our company at AGLX, that it would have been interesting to see if John Boyd had not died at age 72, as if he had lived another 10 years, to see how his thinking would have evolved, because he was very early on some things like complex adaptive systems, complexity thinking, which is a big part of the work that we do in the flow system. And we know that John Boyd evolved, and my favorite story, I'll let Ponch tell it, but how John Boyd changed his thinking about fighter aviation, about fighter plane design, and it was naval aviators that helped him see that. We try to follow that example. Ponch, maybe you could give a little context to that exact story, because I think it's worth telling.
Yeah, so Dan Peterson, the founder of Top Gun, wrote a book about 3 years ago, right before the movie Maverick came out, and in it, he has a section where he talks about the Top Gun bros from Miramar going out to some place in Florida for a classified air conference with John Boyd there. John Boyd was very much, focused on his EM theory, a theory that I believe is about aircraft agility, kind of closed system thinking for aircraft, performance, rate, radius, and that type of thing with aircraft. During the Vietnam War, the Top Gun bros pointed out something that was, hey, Air Force is flying F-4s, we're flying F-4s from our carriers. There's some capabilities and limitations with the F-4 fighting MiGs. But there's one important thing about your energy maneuverability theory that you're excluding, and that's the person in the cockpit, right?
Yep.
And that was from the Top Gun bros that said, hey, it's the person in the cockpit that really matters when it comes to fighting. And of course, our weapons school goes off and creates the program, the Top Gun program. We sent our fighter pilots back to Vietnam, and our kill ratio goes up. It's debatable if it's 12.6 to 1 or whatever. It just went up greater than what it was from the Air Force. So I think that had a significant impact on John Boyd, because his thinking back in the early 70s was about closed systems, using entropy for that.
Yep.
And then he went on the journey with destruction and creation, and where he went from there. So here's a great model for us to follow. Hey, even though you may know something today, but you got to be open for something new information tomorrow or later this afternoon.
All the time.
Yeah. So I think that's a great story to go after. And unfortunately, I don't know if Mark knows this, but I missed Dan Peterson 2 weekends ago in Virginia Beach. We wanted to get that story on here, which would have been great. But it's in the book, his book, Top Gun.
That's awesome. So I have this event that I'm taking on the road. It's called Becoming a Digital Enterprise. And so my thought is around, as I mentioned, helping the government with transforming digitally. But because we have a lot of challenges with some of that for reasons that we've talked about, my challenge to the community is, let's just do it, right? We I work for a company called Axient, right? My colleagues at Leidos, Accenture, you name it. We need to just do the things that the government is asking us to do. Because if we are waiting for them to write a requirement that tells us that this is what we need to do, right? Or how we need to do it, it's never coming, because it's not something that we can write down as a shall statement, right? That says you shall think like that John Boyd, so we need to just do the things, and then we need to learn and document those things, and then come back to the government and say, this is how it gets done, and this is what we are doing, and let's share our lessons learned, right? So let's create the environment and decide that we are going to be better together than independently competing for all these things. Because the challenge there, right, is the industry is not helping this either, because we're building more silos, right? And we're saying, Lockheed Martins and not Northrop Grumman's of the world, we've got the answer. We figured it out. So just come buy this thing, and then you will be your digitally transformed enterprise. That's not how this works, right? We have to collaborate. We have to share. We have to integrate. because no one person has got the answer, and we're better together. So I would love to invite you guys in person. Maybe because I'm going to Dayton, that might be a natural place to go and do this collaboration. But have an event like that where we talk about this from the OODA and John Boyd perspective, because right now it's very focused on the tooling, the
and it can't be. It's the
technology,
system,
right?
It's the system, and this is what when Mark brought up the complexity side of the house. This is why it's so important in the flow system. You got to understand that systems drive behaviors. So the reward systems, the contract systems, the procurement systems, they're all driving bad behavior, not bad people. People aren't bad by nature.
No, not inherently. Yeah.
So that's when we look at helping organizations, we really look at their systems and not their computer. I mean, computer systems drive bad behaviors too. I mean, how many times do you not look at your email, or how many times do you not look at Microsoft Teams or whatever? And you get boxed into Azure DevOps and things like that.
I have government customers that'll say, yeah, we went to the cloud and the cloud doesn't work. It's not the cloud that didn't work, but
but it's and this is, I think, where John Boyd was going. When he's looking at early complexity theory, complex adaptive systems thinking, this is what he was thinking about was, hey, we got to look at the systems, and this is where we are today, right? We have Dave Stone, we have Kinevin framework, we understand the Stacy model, we understand these things now. But how do you communicate to military leaders, government leaders, that it's their system, and it may not be something they can control? Remember this could be a problem. It may be something our politicians are driving too, right? So politics drives
or
a lot
OEMs or industry. Right? The challenge right now when we think about digital engineering, right? That's another big buzzword is we need to become digital engineers so that we can integrate all the data across all these systems that we are getting from the Lockheed Martin and the Boeing and the Northrop Grumman, and now make a decision around how we bring all those things together. But if the government doesn't own the data, if the government doesn't own the interface, now we have a problem. But that goes back then to the requirement. If the government opens up that requirement, like let's stop making it a closed system.
Yeah, and we're going to have some folks on the show soon to talk about category theory and how they integrate different disparate data systems, which is just mind-blowing to me. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. So on our show, I mean, we're going to push orientation to the limits here, right? Right or wrong, we're going to look at things that people are looking at in organizations that could actually help our government, help our nation survive. That's if they want to listen to, right?
Yeah.
So we're very
want to listen.
People, ideas, and things, always in that order. That's one of John Boyd's admonitions to us. People, ideas, and things. So many things that we've seen in business and even the corporate world are, let's get this thing and let's retrofit our people to it because we spend a lot of capital on it, and that's focusing only on the physical and completely disregarding the mental and moral aspects of things. All in the wrong order. I was interviewed the other day on a podcast, and one of the things that came up is if you go on cspan.org and you type in John Boyd, you'll see him testifying before the House Armed Services Committee after the first Gulf War. And that's one of the things. He doesn't quite take his shoe off and bang it on the desk, but it's close. Where he says that people, ideas, and things, that's the thing that we continue to screw up. We've wasted a lot of time, capital, and resources on the wrong order, and we can't do that anymore. And if you look at some of the biographical aspects of that testimony, he intentionally wore, you'll look at him in the video, he's wearing an outlandish colored outfit and weird tie. He wanted to be remembered. And he spoke truth to power to tell them that we cannot continue to do that. We cannot continue to focus on things, ideas, people, or ideas, things, people. We always have to have it, people, ideas, things, always in that order, which explains why one side, it's one of the ways I think you can explain why one side will lose to another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You ever read David and Goliath?
Yeah.
By Malcolm Gladwell?
I love that book.
I just bring it up. It just made me think of it because I know Ponch's daughters play basketball, and we were just talking about March Madness earlier. But there's that story of the guy who coached a team in Silicon Valley that knew nothing of basketball.
Yes.
And he looked at it in a completely different way and aligned that with his people that he had. He found this new idea of basketball on deadlines, the 5-second inbound and the 10-second get across the half court. And he made, it's also a good example of fast transients to make all the other sides that were superior in firepower, that were superior in capital, maybe that were superior in training, completely stand there and not know what game they were playing, to the point where these young girls were getting booed because they were destroying and dismantling the traditional way of things, the traditional basketball teams. But that's focusing on people and looking at things differently. And that's what we're all about. And that's what we live for. And Boyd, again, that's all his point. You go through everything. It always comes down to that order: people, ideas, and things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Malcolm Gladwell, I'm a fangirl. I have such an academic crush on that man. And he, I think, is a natural thinker in the context of what we're talking about. So I went to it was a live table read of his podcast, Revisionist History. And we need to somehow bring him into our little circle here. But
that would be a very good idea, because Dave and Goliath's not the only one. If you read Blink, you will read about Paul Van Riper's big win, right? And Paul Van Riper was a collaborator with Boyd from the Marine Corps in the development of a lot of these ideas. And if people could Google Millennium Challenge 2002, that's about as good as application of Boyd's theory as I've ever seen. But also too, his one work, The Bomber Mafia.
The Bomber Mafia. Oh my God, so good.
Good. I mean, he shows what's the cost of static thinking? What's the cost of being unable to be open-minded and learn? You become extremely vulnerable, or there's a high human cost. So that book is that book's a pretty good book too. So he hits around a lot of the stuff. I don't know that he's ever
he's never talked about it the way that we're talking about it, but he does. I mean, that's his sort of his formula, right? As he brings thinkers from all different domains and then brings that idea together to make his point about whatever, whether it's the bombers or whether it's, an epidemic or whatever. And the table read, you guys would have loved this thing. It was about the movie A Star is Born, of all things. Who cares, right? Because it's not that great a story. However, the movie was made 4 times. I'm not sure if you knew that. So when David Selznick, he was the original, that was the first movie in the 30s. He came into it and did not have an ending, which was kind of crazy. And so that was sort of the point of the podcast. Like, you go into a major movie production and you have no ending written. And he had 2 teams. He had Dorothy Parker, who was well known at the time for her script writing, screenplays. And so she had one ending. And then he also had 2 young people that were, I think, the sons of the producers or whatever, and they went off and they tried to figure out an ending. And keep in mind, it was the 1930s. So the story, as you know, right, is a woman star, her star is rising, and the guy that she's the romantic interest, his star is declining, and he's an alcoholic, and, it doesn't end well for him. Which is a tragic story. I mean, I hate that story, right? Because why are we telling the story about how the guy can't handle the girl's star rising? But anyways, so there's a scene where he leaves the bar inebriated, and the decision was, does he kill somebody because he's drunk, or does he run into a tree? So I think in the 30s version, he ends up running into a tree, right? And then they go to the court scene, and the girl promises the judge that I will make sure he's good. And then, it ends after that. But the decision was, or the discussion on the podcast for this, because that's what he was table reading, was the interview with these scholars. He had a comedian, he had a movie producer, and he had a doctor who had written extensively about drunk driving. So that was the people that he was talking to about this ending. And the thought was, how do we write an ending? And also, there was opportunity there when he talked to the guy who had a medical background about teaching the community about the bad impact of drunk driving. Right. And that could have been very impactful. However, it was the 30s. They had just come out of prohibition, and they didn't want there to be a negative stain on drinking, right, and driving. So they ignored that completely, and which is why they didn't do the thing where he killed somebody, so that would be some sort of like message there. we didn't have laws about drunk driving until the 80s with Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. I didn't realize it took us that long to put a law in place about that. So it was just a fascinating conversation all around this movie that, again, not a great, amazing story, but so all to say that I think that Malcolm Gladwell is very like-minded in terms of bringing together disparate thinking and making a point.
It's amazing the people that come together when you talk about things that are universally applicable to all of us. Other things that are synthetic or artificial or polarizations we'd find anywhere else, they just don't seem to exist. And that's one of the beauties of pursuing this type of work, I think.
Absolutely. And with that, I want to thank you both so much for your time today on a Saturday. And just to wrap things up quickly, what is one thing that you want folks to take away from this about Boyd and his work with OODA? So we'll start with Brian.
You got to put the work in. It's number one. This isn't something, humans are naturally lazy. We like to sit on the couch. We like shortcuts. This isn't something that you want to, take a shortcut on. And at the bottom, at the end of the day, you got to do the work. You can't, there's no panacea for getting out of this VUCA world. You got to do the work.
I love it. Mark?
Yeah, it's hard to top that. And I think that, that certainly my experience of understanding Boyd better, and it's a continuous ongoing learning process. It never stops. When we think of others that are teaching OODA Loop, it's not necessarily their fault in one respect. The way they were trained in the military, just like I was, it was not the way that we're talking about it now. That comes through doing the work. And there is there is an intellectual initiative that one has to take. They have to make the leap to understand it better. And once they do, and once they get that path started, once they get started on that path, rather, a very natural place is to find themselves in a conversation with people just like us talking about these things that is designed to help humans better at any scale. It's not, we didn't really talk about the fractal nature of all this.
Yeah.
Boyd's concept of orientation, OODA, it's for one person, it's for three people here intersecting on an education initiative to help bring this out to more people at the highest levels, some of the very largest organizations we work with, to a one-on-one leader that we might be coaching, and everything in between. The fractal nature of it is imperative to understand, but that only comes back to what Ponch was saying. If you don't do the work, if you don't take the intellectual initiative, you're leaving massive amounts of cognitive firepower tucked away, buried. And that's not where it could be. It could be out doing wonderful things.
Well, I could talk to you guys for hours on this, but we're going to wrap. Thank you again. I look forward to our next conversation.
I hope that you found this as inspirational and educational as I have, and I want you all to make sure to check them out. They've got a podcast too called No Way Out. Make sure to go give them a listen, a follow, a like, and all that jazz. And while you're looking up stuff on the internet, make sure to check out Samaya Studios on LinkedIn and UHI2C anywhere you look. You'll find us. We're there. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, and goodbye. Onward and upward.